morning. Rent regulation has been a fixture in New York City's housing market for close to 7 decades, although the laws that govern rent-regulated housing have been substantially changed and or modified over time, including most recently with the passage of the Rent Act of 2011. In addition to legislative changes, the existing laws allow for dynamic changes in the regulatory status of a significant portion of the rent-regulated housing stock in any given year. Units enter, exit, or change status within the regulatory system. This report is an update of previous studies done since 2003. These totals do not represent every unit that has been added or subtracted from the rent-stabilized stock, but rather those that have been recorded or registered by various city and state agencies. They represent a floor or minimum count of the actual number of newly regulated and deregulated units in these years. Since newly constructed or substantially rehabilitated units are exempt from rent regulation, increases to the regulated housing stock are often a result of owners voluntarily placing these new units under rent stabilization. Events that lead to the addition of stabilized units include the following: the Section 421A tax exemption program, the J51 property tax exemption and abatement program, Mitchell-Lama buyouts, lofts converted to rent-stabilized units, and rent-controlled apartments that convert to rent stabilization. Tax exemption and abatement programs have a significant impact on the inventory of stabilized housing. Apartments newly created with the aid of these programs must typically remain rent stabilized for the duration of their benefits. In 2013, 5,975 units were added to the stabilized stock through the 421A program. That's 138% more than in 2012. The largest number of units were located in Manhattan, 2,460 units, followed by Queens with 1,642, Brooklyn with 1,410, the Bronx with 463, and there were none on Staten Island. According to DHCR, the median rent of registered rent-stabilized apartments receiving 421A tax abatements in 2013 was $3,468. The J51 program added 407 units to the rent-stabilized stock in 2013, a significant increase over the prior year's 108 units. These newly renovated units were located in 3 buildings in Brooklyn, 2 in the Bronx, and 1 building in Queens. The 420C program, which provides tax exemptions for low-income housing projects, added 1,967 units to the stabilized stock in 2013. That's a 49% decrease from the number added the prior year. Of the total number of 420C units added in 2013, 41% were in the Bronx. Brooklyn and Manhattan each held 26%, 7% were in Queens, and there were none on Staten Island. Other additions to the stabilized stock includes lofts converted to stabilized status, adding 26 units, up from 17 in the prior year. In 2013, no Mitchell-Lama rental units became rent stabilized. There were 132 that became stabilized the prior year. 309 units in 2013 were decontrolled and became rent stabilized, down 14% from the prior year. So to sum up all of the additions that we've discussed, there were a total of 8,684 units added to the rent-stabilized housing stock in 2013. That's up 25% from the prior year, when 6,960 units were added. Of all the newly registered rent-stabilized apartments in 2013, the median registered rent was $2,434. Okay, now we'll move on to the subtraction of units from rent stabilization. Deregulation of stabilized units occur because of statutory requirements or because of physical changes to the residential dwellings. Events that lead to the removal of stabilized units include high rent, high income deregulation, high rent vacancy deregulation, co-op condo conversions, expirations of 421A or J51 benefits, substantial rehabilitation, conversion to commercial or professional status, as well as losses to the housing stock that include demolitions, combinations, mergers of units, etc. The largest number of subtractions from the rent-stabilized stock were due to high rent vacancy deregulation, which now occurs when the legal regulated rent of an apartment can reach $2,500 or more after being vacated. The $2,500 rent threshold went into effect with the passage of the Rent Act of 2011 in June of that year. Previously, the threshold was $2,000. According to DHCR rent registration records, of those owners who filed, at least 4,801 units were deregulated in 2013 under high rent vacancy deregulation. That's a 28% decline from the prior year, though in 2013 it represents 63% of units that were removed from rent stabilization. The other type of deregulation that occurs when the rent reaches $2,500, which used to be $2,000 before the Rent Act of 2011, but also household income exceeds $200,000. That's up from $175,000 before the Rent Act of 2011. It's called high rent, high income deregulation. It destabilized a total of 127 apartments in 2013. That's 23% fewer than in 2012. This graph shows the minimum number of units that have left the stabilized stock over the past 2 decades since state law first permitted deregulation of units with rents above $2,000 upon vacancy, or $2,500 since June of 2011. The graph shows an increase occurring annually from 2000 until 2009, followed by a decline in each of the last 4 years. The most recent year saw the fewest recorded units deregulated due to high rent vacancy deregulation since 2000. During this entire period, represented by the graph, a minimum of 133,173 units were registered with DHCR as being deregulated due to high rent vacancy deregulation. This graph shows the number of units that have left the stabilized housing stock due to high rent, high income deregulation from 1994 to 2013. Since 1994, at least 5,798 units have left the deregulated since due to high rent, high income deregulation. In every year except 2009 and 1994, which was the initial year that high rent, high income deregulation was permitted, the number of units registered as deregulated has been less than 400 units each year, including this past year when 127 were deregulated. The most recent year is the fewest recorded units deregulated due to high rent income deregulation ever. Other units left rent stabilization for other reasons, including the following: co-op condo status conversions, which include both newly converted units as well as stabilized tenants vacating apartments in previously converted buildings, totaled 774 units, 16% fewer than in the prior year. Expiration of 421A benefits resulted in a total of 757 units removed from the stabilization system. That's 125% more than in the prior year. The expiration of J51 benefits resulted in a total of 188 units removed, 23% fewer than in the prior year. 308 units were removed from stabilization due to substantial rehabilitation, down 36% from the prior year. Also, 31 units were converted to non-residential use, down from 74 the prior year. Other losses to the stabilized housing stock are due to such factors as the merger of pre-existing units or demolition, for example, resulted in 611 additional units leaving the stabilized housing stock. That's 9% more than in the prior year. So summing up all the subtractions, a total of 7,597 units left stabilization status in 2013. That's 20% fewer than in the prior year. So we'll sum up. The study found a net gain of an estimated 1,087 units to the stabilized housing stock in 2013. That's the first net gain since the change in the stabilized stock was first examined by us on an annual basis in 2003. The vast majority of additions to the stabilized stock this past year were the result of tax incentive programs. The creation of 421A units equaled 69% of the additions, and 420C units resulted in 23%. Meanwhile, high rent vacancy deregulation was the largest source of measured subtractions from the stabilized stock. in 2013, accounting for 63% of the total number of subtractions. This table shows the total number of additions and subtractions of all the programs in 2013. It includes the 8,684 additions to the stabilized stock and the 7,597 units removed from stabilization. If you take the difference between the two, it resulted in a net gain to the stabilized stock in 2013 of 1,087 units. And this graph shows the net change in the total number of apartments removed from rent stabilization from 2003, which is the first year the RGB prepared this report, to the most recent year, 2013. And like I said, this year there was a net gain of 1,087 units, which is the first time we've seen a net gain since we have been analyzing this data in 2003. Thank you. I will now take any questions you might have.
Brian, one gain to stabilized housing, I don't know if you take it into account in any of your categories, but there have been thousands of apartments that have been re-regulated as a result of the Roberts decision by the Court of Appeals. I personally know one classic example is the Stuyvesant Town Peter Cooper Village. There were over 4,000 market apartments that came back into stabilization. Is that accounted for in your analysis at all? And that's just one project. I personally know of hundreds of buildings throughout New York City that fell under the Roberts situation that caused thousands of previous market apartments to come back into rent stabilization because their J51 tax abatements had not expired yet.
Well, as we noted in the report, the data we report is only what we know that is reported by various agencies, and we point out in the report that we were not able to get the number of these units from DHCR that were added back.
So you're not able to get that number?
No.
No. So the 1,000 net gain could be a very significant understatement.
Well, this only reports what we have available statistically, so I can't say how many were added back beyond that.
Brian, just to be clear, that those units could have been gained 5 years ago, and that wouldn't be in this data for this year. Those units could have been put back on the rolls in 2010, and that would be in that number. It just wouldn't be in the 2013 number.
As far as I know, those numbers may not have been added back in prior years, but you can ask DHCR perhaps when they testify in a little while.
One last quick question. The co-op condo conversion, it's a fairly insignificant or statistically insignificant number that gets added because of that, but I was just curious, the actual process itself, the act of a condo conversion or a co-op conversion does not eliminate the rent stabilized lease, correct? If somebody is in an
Typically, if it's a non-conversion, a non-eviction plan,
right.
The stabilized tenant remains a stabilized tenant, and then we only record that it's removed when they either move out or if it's an eviction plan and they move out.
I just want to clarify that because the title itself looks like the act of a condo conversion deregulates the apartments, but it's
Right.
So Brian, we often hear in various discussions of rent stabilization and the potential losses about buyouts. So when a new owner purchases a building and buys out a current tenant, those would be subsumed in the vacancy, high rent vacancy numbers. Would that be correct?
Well, I'm not sure if it would be high rent vacancy because it's not necessarily a high rent if they buy them out. I'm not sure how DHCR records them. You can ask them perhaps.
Okay.
As far as I know, we don't collect that data
I was
apart from this.
assuming it would come under the vacancy because presumably the buyout would result in the tenant vacating the apartment. It would be after they're leaving the apartment that presumably some other actions would take place that
Right.
would result in the rent going out. But we'll ask.
Yeah, they may register it as a high rent vacancy if they but I'm not sure
Okay.
exactly
All
for
right,
sure.
thank you.
Okay,
No other questions? Thank you so much.
thanks.
We won't have it. It's not recorded. Buyouts aren't recorded. This is a vacancy. They're not going to know. Well, that's part of the vacancy, that's for them. That's the category. There's high income, right.
So we're very happy to welcome the folks from DHCR. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Morning.
Good morning. My name is Woody Pascal, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for New York State Homes and Community Renewal's Office of Rent Administration. First, let me say congratulations to all of you on your recent appointments. Thank you for your willingness to serve the people of the City of New York. Our city continues to need public servants who share in a vision of open and accountable government. On behalf of Commissioner Towns and all of the members of HCR, I'd like to say thank you. Now, on to the task of today, and I've got the housekeeping out of the way. Sitting on my right is Daniel Savory, who is going to be serving as my special counsel. On his right is Mike Berrios, my special and senior advisor, who has worked tirelessly with the folks here at the Rent Guidelines Board for a long, long time. And on my left is Assistant Commissioner Guy Alba. Madam Chair, members of the board, as the Deputy Commissioner for the ORA, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity both to provide you with an update on recent activities at ORA and for allowing New York State Homes and Community Renewal to be part of the process leading to the promulgation of this year's guidelines for rent-stabilized apartments. As you're aware, the Division of Housing and Community Renewal has concluded the formal process under the New York State Administrative Procedure Act, otherwise known as SAPA, to amend various regulations in the Rent Stabilization Code, the Tenant Protection Regulations, and the state and New York City rent control regulations. The publication of these documents and their summaries were in the New York State Registry on January 8th, 2014. In order to comply, we have modified various fact sheets, operational bulletins, policy statements, and procedures. Copies of these can be accessed on our website. And as a matter, if you did not know, this current situation is in litigation, so we're going to be very limited on what we can discuss and what we can't discuss. Now, on to some services that we provide. We have enhanced our online case inquiry status, or online applications to report conditions that require emergency repairs that we have. We have enhanced our owner rent regulation application system. This system allows owners to file various applications online using the same user ID and password. It also serves as a benefit to owners because now they can print certified rent rolls and do not need to visit a borough rent office to generate these rolls. Our Arrow system, which is used for annual registration for rent-regulated properties from 2001 going forward, has been able to capture over 60,000 buildings and over 1 million apartments have successfully used this system. Along with our maximum base rent application, owners can file owner applications to restore rents online. This application is used to This application is used to file an owner's application to restore rents based on restoration of services that were deemed not maintained by a rent reduction order that was filed after January 1st of 2000. Owners of buildings with apartments subject to rent control have successfully filed online over 4,100 fuel cost reports. We have also included a section on our website highlighting what is new at ORA. For example, the content may include case processing status. For example, this month in April, we issued over 57 rent overcharge orders establishing legal rents and directing refunds in excess of $270,000. 50 lease renewal orders directing the issuance of correction of various lease renewals. 88 decrease in service orders directing that owners repair apartments and and reducing rents until the repairs are made, and 76 major capital improvement orders for items valued in excess of $10 million. We've made adjustments in case processing, working with our partners at the Department of Finance and the New York City Housing Authority, and overcharge in our service applications. We've updated information, trying to pull information regarding Section 8, SCREE, and DRE information. Copies of orders that we issued are sent to the various agencies, and we are in the process of drafting an update on our annual review. You should also know that we are in the last stages of an extensive and exhaustive review of our computer systems, which are 30 years old. We're looking forward to shortly have a vendor in place to bring us into the 21st century. And lastly, we continue to provide owners and tenants with information and guidance. Our public information staff continues to answer numerous telephone calls, internet queries on a daily basis, and that's it. So turning to the proposed guidelines that are before the board, our office has carefully reviewed them, and if they are adopted, we do not foresee any problems in administering them. In conclusion, on behalf of Commissioner CEO Darrell C. Towns and HCR, I wish you success in your difficult deliberations and offer you ORA's continued support and cooperation. Thank you, and we'll take any questions.
Mr. Pascal, this is related to an earlier question I had concerning the registration of apartments that were formerly believed to be exempt from rent regulation. In the letter by the Deputy Commissioner of the TPU unit, he references a recapturing of over 30,000 rent-stabilized units. Are these the type of recapturing that relate back to formerly market apartments that were in fact subsequently deemed to be rent-stabilized as a result of the Roberts decision? Or is this category a mix of many types of recapturing for many different reasons?
Well, the report that 30,000 units came back into the system, that would be the legal determination based on Roberts. But of course, your report that Brian spoke about and what we can give you is information on our registration system. So those 30,000 started a conga line which will get into our registration system. And there are also some issues prospectively about registration, because you had the Roberts decision, and then you had, what should owners do? So eventually, maybe 2 years from now, we don't know, those 30,000 will appear in our registration records and will appear in your report.
So we are then to take from this that, in fact, the net gain could be substantially higher than the 1,000 some odd units.
It could very well be, yes.
We're not even talking a few hundred, we're talking thousands of
Right,
units.
it could very well be, but it might take some time for them to get into our registration system. There's paperwork, it gets to Albany, it has to be entered into, and there are still some continuing issues about the duty to register. When does that start?
I understand Totally.
So I have a related question that I think follows to some degree from Magna's question. What's the enforcement mechanism for owners under the Roberts decision? Is it sort of self-enforcement? Is there some action tenants have to take? Are the tenants currently, because in one sense, one would assume the tenants suddenly have different rents as a result of the decision, but is that actually not the case because there's this process that's underway? So what is I think, again, related to Magna's question, is there a present-day effect of the decision that we're not seeing in our information, or is, as your answer suggested, perhaps a slower process that will see actual effects for tenants and landlords over time?
Well, I mean, there's two issues. One is, given the publicity and the tenant organizations, I would imagine most of the Roberts tenants are on top of the issue with their advocates. And that's proceeding, and they have all the legal rights. This issue deals with registration. When is it registered, and those duties. And so it's really two different issues. So I think the fact that 30,000 units have come back in, I would imagine that many of those tenants know they're going to be back in, and through the efforts of the tenant protection unit and through any complaints that come to us. But again, I would imagine that the parties, the owners and the tenants, are working this out without having to file individual complaints with us every day.
I hope not.
Right.
So just to follow that up, when the owner re-registers a unit that had been previously deregulated before the Roberts rule, is there something on the registration form that they check or will check to say that we are re-registering? How do you tell that particular unit was deregulated and coming back online because of the Roberts rule?
Well, that's one of the issues we'll be looking at in terms of looking at our forms and seeing how the Roberts decision impacts on that, you know. And there is a problem potentially of retroactively having prior registrations, so we may not go down that road. That might be more complicated. So these are issues that the agency is wrestling with right now.
I want to turn our attention to the MCIs if possible, and I'm interested in finding out, I know you have a complaint-driven system, but when an owner files an MCI, I'm wondering what searching the agency does independent of a tenant filing an answer. What data do you look at? What independent review do you do? Do you look at HPD violations that may be on the property? Do you look at the bills? If the tenants are not doing anything, kind of what is your independent assessment?
We do look at the various government entities, DOB, HPD. It's what they call a complete audit to ensure that the tenants' rights are being protected and the owners are doing the right thing. But we do look at those areas.
So just so I'm clear, so you're saying that if HPD would give you this information, you would review it? Because it's my understanding from Commissioner Bean that she's trying to provide the information to HCR, and HCR says they are not able to look at that data when making MCI determinations.
I'm not sure what data she's trying to forward to us. We have access to their system, so we know.
So you can, so I'm clear, you can look at their data even if there's no complaint filed?
Look at their data.
You look at that data. Thank you.
So maybe on that note, I have a quick comment about, so in many buildings that I've seen the history of where the MCI is issued and there's numerous C violations, and my understanding is that no major capital improvement may be issued if there's a number of C violations. So if that data is being looked at, how is that overlooked a little, a lot of the time? And so tenants in their response sort of address this issue. I know it will just delay the MCI until the later date that those violations are corrected, but it's still a process that is sort of tenant initiated, and I'm wondering how that is used.
Well, it's a timing issue, because in the new regs, we affirmatively state that we'll look at the Class C violations. Now, in the past, and maybe some of the buildings you're talking about, we didn't look at it, or we didn't have the technology interchange with the agency to go into that. But since the code amendment, it's out there for the public, we will look at it, and the technology has been enhanced.
I think it actually might be helpful for the members of the board that aren't familiar with the MCI process, what kind of review, as it relates to your question, not just the audit of violations, but also the actual audit of the validity of the MCI increases. Could you just talk a little bit about your process? Because I think that's pretty informative.
In regard to MCI is a thorough audit in regard to contracts submitted, certification from from the contractors. We look at tenants for the tenants are served with a notice. So whatever triggers that we may not see as part of the package, they will institute something that we may need to look into. So it is a complete audit in regard to finances, make sure items have been paid for, what's installation. There's a lot of back and forth going back in regard to, sometimes contracts consist of a number of things that are MCIs, but there's a number of things that are not, that we consider to be repairs. And we've been going back and forth with the owners, and there's a large number of MCIs are adjusted in regard to that effect, and pieces of it are denied. So it is a thorough audit, and they go through the process. The tenants' complaints are vital because they know what's going on in the building. They see things that we don't see, and the owner's not submitting that particular information. So those responses are triggers for us. So they're given notice first time 20 days, but we're pretty liberal in regard to giving extensions at times. So I mean, that's not a problem in terms of time being submitted. I'll just write it into the case file. Yeah, just make a request for case file. They don't have to. If they need additional time, they just make a phone call to our hotline. They'll be able to tell them what they need to do in regard to that. We just need to know what's going on with the particulars. Sometimes they raise issues that has nothing to do with MCI, and it's something we just, that may have to do with a service-related issue in regard. We'll instruct them what they need to do in regard to that issue, but we'll take account a lot of information that they supply, and that goes into a lot in regard to processing the case. But we look at the entire case as a full view of the process. There's a lot of back and forth going on.
I want to look at numbers. If you look at Unit 2033 from the questions you've asked, and you can see how deep we actually go and investigate from between what the owners applied for to what the owners are granted. You know that there's a lot of investigation and a lot of time and a lot of effort being put in to this process.
Again, MCI being clarified as a building-wide improvement and not having it be, sorry, I'm just restating this for everybody's sake, building-wide improvement that all tenants benefit from, not just single tenants. And also it cannot be deemed as repairs. So in addition to, a tremendously detailed audit of those costs and making sure that people paid what they say they paid, I mean, down to the invoice and the evidence that you've paid. Canceled checks. I mean, it is, I commend you guys. I mean, you have a mound of documents, but given that the numbers and the hit rate, it does show that, you really are extremely thorough in making sure that these are valid improvements that then get amortized over the 7 years.
Can I just, what percentage of MCI applications do tenants actually file complaints in?
I'm not sure,
Yeah, and how often do you, when an MCI, how often do you do an inspection on site of the proposed increase? Like, how often do you go out to the building? A third of the time? Thank you.
So there are two numbers, and again, thank you so much for providing the answers to the questions beforehand. It's really helpful. There are two answers where the numbers are somewhat lower than I would have expected, and it may be because there are other, city mechanisms to handle the numbers. But I'm just interested in question 5, the number of heat complaints. That seems both the number of complaints filed and, to some extent the number that are granted, but particularly, frankly, the number that are filed seems very low to me in light of the very large number, obviously, of units. and what I understand to be a challenge on this issue that tenants face. So I'm just curious if you can help us understand that.
Well, I think HPD has a much larger program.
That's what I was.
Since it's an emergency condition, generally the tenants will go HPD, and so.
And so they come to you only if it hasn't been sufficiently handled by HPD and they
Both
weren't.
have to go ahead.
Both,
They have to go to HPD first.
first, I
And
see.
again, we use their data to actually process.
And
these
so you,
proposals.
and
We
so,
don't even do inspections, we actually verify, we just go into HPD's system and actually look at it and say, okay, there is a heat and hot water complaint, it's been sustained, and then the owner has to address it.
okay, so the way that it would proceed would be a tenant would go to HPD, because obviously this is an emergency, it's freezing, they have no heat. And this would then translate into a filing with you if the condition lasts long enough that the tenant concludes that they'd like to file for a rent reduction? Is that how it?
They can contact us once they contact HPD.
I see, okay, but, so again, the fact that it's, this obviously doesn't mean that there are only, 81 units that actually had issues, but 81 who
That
followed
contact
through
us.
with you. The other question I had with respect to numbers seeming low is question 53 with respect to owner hardship applications. So that also, I mean, obviously, we were, sort of, it's good news that the number of distressed buildings is sort of as low as it is. That was positive, I think, for the state of rent-stabilized buildings and units in the city. That being said, there obviously are, I think, somewhere around 6% of buildings are considered distressed. So I was curious, in light of that, 3 applications seems low. So if you could just address why that would be.
Well, it's a very complex application. It requires a lot of business records. And you can imagine if a building is distressed, they may not have all the records that we would require. There were 2 forms of hardship. One is comparative hardship, which actually looks back many, many years ago. So that's probably a non-starter for most of these buildings. And then there's a concept of alternative hardship, where it's a percentage. I believe it's 5%. So you want to make a 5% return. Again, a lot of business records, and in the real world, these issues may be handled outside of our system.
In the real world, outside of your system, meaning,
Meaning that economic transactions, they sell the building.
Okay.
As opposed to say, I want to make this building work, I'll file an application with the agency
So,
and get an increase.
okay, because obviously HPD has set in place a number of programs to work with distressed buildings and to the anti-abandonment plans that we read about in the report. And so your suggestion is between perhaps the success of those programs ideally and selling the building or whatever other means might be taken, those are the routes that owners pursue as opposed to owner hardship applications. Is there any reason to think that this process could be improved in some way that would benefit both tenants and owners?
Well, it's regulatory and statutorily mandated, so we can't, make it easier.
Got it.
Or whatever, it is what it is, so.
Updating the computer system's not going to help on this one.
It's more the business records and all the hoops to go through.
But I am happy that you're getting better computers.
I just want to have a follow-up, I guess, comment, having represented many owners who have attempted to do these hardship applications, unlike a heat complaint, which is a one form, or possibly a one phone call. As you correctly described, the process to apply for hardship for an owner is unbelievably onerous, to the extent that the way that the agency has interpreted the law makes it virtually impossible to file certain applications, such as the comparative hardship, just because of the way that the regulations are drafted. You've very recently did a major overhaul to the code. Why, if you can, address this? Did the agency not even look at this issue?
Well, I mean, it's between technocratic advice and political. But, I mean, we amend the code because of court decisions, advocates coming to us, and I don't believe in the last few years any advocates, owner advocates have come to us with maybe detailed suggestions specifically on this issue. So I'm just hazarding a guess, that's maybe one reason why that was not addressed. I'll just throw something else out for you. The hardship applications developed before luxury decontrol, where rent regulation was hermetically sealed, every increase. And now with luxury decontrol in certain buildings, there may be other alternatives than coming to us to get, that's just my own
You're
personal
just speculating.
idea for why there's so few applications and why maybe owner advocates haven't pushed this on us.
It's as speculative as the notion that there are other remedies and in other agencies. I mean, definitely owners do what they have to do in order to overcome the circumstances. But the fact remains that that is a section of the code that is virtually unused because it is unworkable for the vast majority of owners. And another point on this, for edification purposes of the new board members, these applications, the very few that are even filed, take years, correct? Years to be resolved.
I think a lot of applications, no offense, with DHCR take a really long time.
We're talking, in some cases, over 10 years. So it becomes a virtual nullity to even pursue this as a possible remedy.
Clearly, people are not pursuing it as an option.
Yes, I have a question. So I see that in 2013, 3 applications were filed, and only 1 case was found to qualify for hardship. So is there a record, like going back to 10 years, how many applications were filed, how many applications were approved? Again, do you have a record of that?
Actually, we've been asking this question for a while,
I mean,
so
if you
we
look
probably have some
We
going
probably
back.
have some for the past years, but I would say, in the last 10 years, maybe 10,
That's not really large number.
very, very small number. Because of all the.
Because of all the
because of
paperwork
all the
involved
hurdles
and-
all the difficulties and expense, legal issues, accounting issues, and many other things that have to be taken into.
So do you think by improving the computer system we'll have better numbers?
Not the computer, this is more of a legal question.
It's
which
not
is-
the computer
Again, this is where I
system.
step aside, this is where I step
Just-
aside.
Incomplete applications, the back and forth that go with that, it's,
But I'll add up what we have, Cecilia, and I'll circulate it to the board.
So can I ask just one other question? I'm interested to hear about that you're using other databases, HPT, DOB. And I'm wondering, so you're using them in relationship to MCIs, and you're using them in relationship to all reduction in service applications? So if someone says, oh, I have peeling paint, do you look at HPD's website to say, hey, there's a only heat violations? And why aren't you not using it then for other applications or complaints or reduction in services if that database is available to you?
Well, we have our own inspectors, and the heat, hot water, and certain C violations for MCIs, those are particularly grievous. As to other issues, we'd like to send out our inspectors for updated conditions. So we understand that HPD, has a million violations on their computer records. Some may be stale. So I don't believe we'll adopt looking at HPD's violations for every service case. We have our inspections, and that's really pretty well.
and it's mandated by law. City handles housing maintenance code, we handle rent stabilization code. So we're mandated to go out for our own.
So you're saying you could look at them and still send out your own inspections, but at this point, you're not looking at them but anything but heat violations?
Say it again?
It sounds like you can look at them and still send out your own inspections to make an independent assessment, but you're only looking at them for heat violations.
We're mandated by law to look at them for heat violations. For other issues that happen in service-related issues, we have to actually go out by law. We're required to go out.
And so how long does it take to get an inspector out?
Depends on the situation, what's
So
going on.
that-
And getting access, having that tenant
Right.
to be available.
And so if for some reason tenants are working when you're coming to the inspections, or how many of those things
It's a little bit
are-
different. Unlike HPD that just comes out within 28, 48 hours, we actually schedule an appointment. Our process is someone sends us something, we give the owner by law, we have to give an owner a certain number of days for them to respond back or to maybe correct it. We may have to go out. They may have corrected the issue prior to us going out. So the different things that happen.
Right. So if a tenant has a gaping hole on their wall, they call HPD, get the violation. After calling 311 numerous times, they're told to file an application with a DHCR, and then they have to give the notice of 10 days by letter certified to the landlord, and then even after that, 10 days?
That's been changed.
Okay.
That's one of the issues.
And then after the application is in with you guys, how long do you take to send an inspector out?
But we're still required by law to notify the owner that we received this complaint, and
And
it's
how long is that?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
20 days.
20 days.
20 days.
That's if they give a response prior.
They've given, right.
It's longer if they, I think it's 45, if they.
This is a
didn't-
new issue.
Right, it's a new issue. If they never contact you.
Right.
And then how long does the application process take?
Again, it depends on the availability of the
Right.
tenant. We try to make sure that we can get access to the unit, so it varies. It varies.
In certain cases, I give priority. I mean, the vacate orders, things like that. Things, a collapsed ceiling will get a priority versus a peeling paint,
Right.
you know, things like that. So those cases are given priority. Put them front of the line. So you're gonna have some cases it's gonna take a little longer than others.
Any other questions?
Yes, please. According to your answer to number 47, as there were only 195 rent reduction orders based on these serious, building-wide conditions, speaking of low numbers, this doesn't seem to be, in relatively speaking, of over, thousands of rent-regulated buildings.
Are you looking at what question?
Yeah, number 47.
That's currently pending cases.
Currently
Pending cases at
No,
this
this,
point.
isn't this, there were rent reduction orders, or these are just applications?
These are applications
These
currently
are
pending.
applications, so you didn't report the number of orders that actually came down,
Which would be a lower number.
right? Because these are just allegations.
Yeah, the question was asking for applications specifically.
Okay, that's fine, but is it fair to infer then that there will be even less number of orders than applications filed?
We'd have to look, yeah.
Do you know on average how long these applications take? Because I work in buildings. We've been waiting for answers and the back and forth alone of a year and a half. So I'm wondering about if that's backlogged, if like that number is maybe like depending on by what year, how many orders you issue, all of those.
We have to get you
I know.
the numbers.
Excuse
On
me?
that, we'd have to get you the numbers. We can get you times.
Sorry, just to
Number 8.
clarify. So you're talking of the 832,000 units that you have, you're looking at, I guess there's slightly different, this is 195 pending cases have to do with buildings?
Buildings.
Building-wide.
Buildings, but even as to units, the second part of that answer is 725,
Which is
based on individual
less
apartment.
than 1%, and these are just the complaints. So this is less than 1%. Again, just talking about order of magnitude, the number of complaints is, pending a case, is less than 1% of the overall stock.
Is
And then-
pending.
Right, but again, less than 1%, and then they can't have more than that, that would be
Sure, they
determined.
could have 1 million that are orders in place. We don't know what the number of orders in place for violations of reduction in services
Over what period of time?
that are in place right now. Some could be in place for 10 years or 20 years if the landlord doesn't ever fix it, or it can be in place for 6 months, or it could be denied. This is just, right. This is just what's pending.
We're talking
Yeah,
about.
I think his answer.
We looked at books. And under question 8, what was the total number of rent reductions in 2012 and 2013? Fiscal year 2012, 2013, there were 1,325 rent reduction orders issued. And it's not broken out between buildings 2014, there were 1,079 rent reduction orders issued.
So still a relatively small percentage of the overall rent-stabilized housing stock. That's just our observation, that's all.
Could you tell us how many are pending? Like, how many, not pending, how many orders are in effect? Because it could be you issued 1,000 new orders, those orders could be in effect for 10 years if the owner never fixes something.
That one, we'd have to pull a number.
Great, thank you.
Quick question, when you're answering Harvey's question about I think you had asked for the number of complaints, correct? Harvey, what was your?
How many orders are in effect now?
Okay. Just right now, but previously you had asked, I wrote down that you had also asked for the number of complaints, regarding the MCI applications. Can you also give us some information about not just the complaints, but also that same statistical, how many are actually then, I don't know if that might be available here, actually approved? The complaints being approved and therefore the MCI is being, is that statistically? Okay.
Yeah. Page 6 and 7. I don't think it says percentages, it just says total amounts. Into the amount applied.
Motion 23, MCIs.
That's the amount, because they're looking for.
34.
Yeah, we have to pull those.
What I recommend that we do is like what we've done in previous years, just some of the detailed questions that will take us to extrapolate more data. To just put it together, and Andrew will forward it to us, and
That's great.
We'll go right into the
Okay.
system.
I wasn't assuming that you can do the math on the spot. I did do some quick math, though, that I just wanted to make sure I was doing correctly. There was a question about the citywide turnover rate per year, number 27. And you referenced number 26. But correct me if I'm wrong, I totaled the number of vacancy registrations to be 70,344 when you look at the different boroughs. And 70,344 divided by the total existing stock is roughly 8.5%. Is that, maybe I don't know what number 27 was asking, but I was assuming they were asking for a annual turnover rate. In this case, is that 8.5% is the vacancy turnover rate? Sorry, I interpreted number 27 to be the question of the turnover rate per year.
Right, they could be a double.
Those vacancy registrations might be for multiple years. That might be, could that be part of
Okay.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it might not be for
Just
one
213.
particular year, it might be we receive it might be a new owner looking through the records, say, oh, I should have filed it or whatever.
Okay,
So I think that might be the answer.
Yeah, because like from one year, you can actually still do registration until March of the.
okay, then never mind.
Some data could come in.
Any other questions? Thank you all so much, and undoubtedly we will send some follow-up questions on the specifics.
If I may,
Oh, I'm sorry, one follow-up, one final question?
actually just to
Two. yeah.
I was wondering if you are supplying a copy of your comments, Mr. Pascal?
Yes,
Okay,
Yes.
so we can have
Absolutely.
a written copy of what you testified to. My last question has to do with number 57, in which you indicate that the TPU does not make determinations in the manner as that term is used by the ORA. But in the letter that was written by Deputy Commissioner White, he uses the word TPU has determined, TPU has demanded. Could you just clarify that? I'm confused
I don't know,
because
I don't know what letter you're referring to.
I'm talking about the one that was submitted to the RGB, the May 20th. Letter by Deputy Commissioner White.
Commissioner White responded, and I don't think it would be appropriate for us to, try to interpret his letter or answers to your question.
But you're making a distinction in the answer that the TPU does not make determinations. It only issues audit findings. But his letter seems to indicate that the TPU does make determinations.
Well, they don't issue determinations in terms of like what we do with rent administrator's orders that are parable and go to Article 78.
Are the,
And
se-
so,
are the consequences different? In other words, if
Well, they're more of an investigative body, where they refer the information to us, and then we do our process, which goes back to where it's parable, and we have a rent administrator's orders.
And also, I believe the Tenant Protection Unit does have the power to go directly to court for certain, for subpoenas or whatever. So they may use the word determination to help them go through that process. But again, it's a different system. And I think we're correct in saying that it's not, it doesn't look like the orders that we issue that are parable and go to Article 7.
So if an owner seeks to challenge these determinations or findings, does the owner have any remedy at the TPU level? These seem to be just final and non-appealable findings with clear consequences for non-compliance.
But then they get referred to us. After they make their findings, it gets referred to us, and then we process. So the owner eventually will have an opportunity.
Are all the findings referred to ORA?
Not that I know of, no.
So in those situations when
If the owner and the Tenant Protection Unit have addressed their issues and the issue's been resolved, it wouldn't be referred to us.
Okay, so you're basically saying that only the contested ones would be referred to you?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.